So a big challenge for journalists obviously is that you're wanting to have reliable factual information that you're using within your stories. And one way that you can do this is by analysing reports on issues, but that can be quite a lengthy, time-consuming process in many cases. However, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to be looking at Google's NotebookLM and identifying how that can help summarise reports in some situations, and how that can give you a bit of a steer around stories and identifying if there's something there or if the inverse is true, and kind of give you that background information that you really need to be able to kind of develop a story. So the story that I'm going to be looking at today is around children, and do they still spend their time in the way that they used to spend their time? So do they spend more times in front of screens, or are they actually just as physically active as they always were? Or is it particular groups of children that are still physically active and other groups of children who are now behind iPads and iPhones a lot of the time? And to do this, I'm going to be looking at two key reports that analyse kind of how kids spend their time, and how much activity they have, and what they get up to effectively. And I'm going to try and identify from that if the kind of consensus view that kids spend all the time sitting in front of screens is true, or whether they're still doing as much activity as they used to do. And to do that, I'm going to get myself into NotebookLM and get started with that. So this is what NotebookLM's looks like once you've signed in. So to sign into it, it's relatively easy. As you can see at the top, there is an app that you can get on your phone to use it, but if you're accessing it using a desktop, it's just notebooklm.google.com, and then to sign into an account on NotebookLM, to create an account, you can use your Google account or you can use your email. So there are a few different ways of getting sorted with it. Once you've got signed in, you'll be end up on this screen here which says welcome to NotebookLM. And what I'm going to want to do first of all is upload some material into it, because as a tool this basically will help summarise what is in that material that I've got there. So if I go to create new, okay, so then it takes me to this next screen which is talking to me about adding sources into my notebook, and there are a few different ways that I can do this. So I can either upload information, and the majority of the time that will be a PDF, but it could be an MP3 if it's audio. You could do it in a few different other ways as well. You could take stuff straight from a Google Drive if you've got it. So if you've got Google Docs or you've got some Google Sheets that have got data on, so that's very much like Excel, or slides, you can upload those as well. You can have a link to a website, so if you wanted to take information straight off a website, I've never tried that, but you can give that a go. YouTube as well, so if you've got a YouTube video that you wanting to include, it will kind of take the key bits of the information out of the YouTube video as well, or you can copy text straight into it. So for mine today, I'm going to upload a couple of sources. So the sources that I'm going to upload are this report here, which is the Active Lives Children and Young People's Survey, which was published last December, which basically is a report by Sport England that talks about how children spend their time in terms of activities, exercise, those kinds of things, levels of activity, variety of activity are two of the key kind of bits within that. So that's one piece of information that I'm going to look at, and the second piece of information that I'm going to look at is Ofcom's Media Nations survey, which came out in July 2024, and that basically looks at how people engage with media, and by media it basically means things like television, it means your phone, it means the internet, and it kind of breaks it down through generations as well. So obviously one of the key things that I'm looking for is how younger people engage with the media, but it covers across a wide age group as well. So what I'm going to do to get started is upload these two sources into my document here, so I just need to find where I've put them. So there's Media Nations there, add that one, and then I can add my second one, which is the Active Live survey as well. So these will upload, and what it'll do first of all is kind of give you a bit of a brief overview of what you've uploaded. That's not particularly what I'm interested in. So what I'm going to do in a second is I'm going to put a prompt into this chat area here, and basically that is very similar to what you would do if you were using a large language model. So for example, ChatGPT or Google's Gemini, you would start asking it a question that you want it to answer using the information that you've uploaded to it. NotebookLM went quite, when it first came out, it was quite popular as well, because it also produces a podcast with two hosts where they have a conversation about the sources that you bring into it. So what will happen in a minute when all this is uploaded is that I'll have this generate button here that I can ask it to produce a podcast based on those two sources, and those two AI presenters will basically discuss the information that I've uploaded into it. And obviously this is my sources section, so this is where those two reports are currently uploading. Okay, so I've now got this information where I've got those two PDFs are in there. I've got a very quick summary here, and it's gone quite a lot on the Media Nations one. I think it's probably because that was the first one I uploaded, and like I say, I've got the option to have a podcast if I want to listen to their summary of both of them. So I'm going to start with the active lives the children survey. So I'm going to put into here now a prompt to try and get the key bits of information out of that report that I think are going to be quite useful to me. Okay, so I've now written my prompt. So I've put in there, based on the active lives children report alone, identify the key findings of the report. I want to particularly focus on the level of activities amongst children and any variations amongst the general child population. And I'll put at the end, I am a journalist. So identify the key findings as they would be to a general news audience. Okay, and let's see what it does. Okay, so it's repeating the prompt back to me a little bit. So it's telling me the new report reveals that less than half of English children meet daily activity guidelines. So that is obviously a bit of a concern between 5 and 16-year-olds. 47.8% children and young people, which is approximately 3.5 million children, are currently meeting the guidelines, which obviously means that just over 50% aren't. There are some concerns around about just under a third of children doing less than 30 minutes of activity a day. There has been some longer term improvement, and compared to 6 years ago, the number of active children has actually increased. There is no real variation between the amount of activity in and out of school. It's saying that activity levels are lowest for children in school between 7 and 9. Boys are more active than girls. Children from less affluent families are the least likely to be active, and children from ethnic minorities are less likely to be active. But disability is no boundary. Inequality is an issue as well. Okay, so that's the summary from that. Okay, so then I can go into my second report, and I can actually reuse quite a lot of this prompt here. So if I paste that in, so I'm basing it on the Media Nations report. Identify the key findings. I want to particularly focus on how children use the media. Any variations amongst the general child population. I'm a journalist, so I identify the key findings as they would be to a general news audience. And then we'll see what the findings are from there. Okay, so now I've got the key findings from the Media Nations report. Younger audiences are abandoning traditional TV. Less than half of 16 to 24-year-olds tuned into television. Younger children fall is almost as fast. Daily TV following has fallen by 3/4 since 2013. Children 4 to 5 now only watch 38 minutes. So for a start off, they're watching a lot less television. So is that related to their kind of physical activity? Well, possibly not, as well as it says here. So video viewing is still up, which is being driven by online. Young audiences are particularly interested in YouTube, TikTok and Twitch. 40% of their total in-home time for kids between 4 to 15 is spent on video sharing platforms. Okay, so that is obviously quite a big thing. So streaming on demand and video on demand is also growing in there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put final prompt in. I'm going to select all the sources, and now I'm going to ask it to try and bring together these two reports. Now, this may work, this may not work. It might end up drawing some false conclusions about the fact that these two things are related. So you do need to be aware of that. It's just because two things are recurring doesn't necessarily mean that they're linked. So that's quite important to remember. But I'm going to see what it kind of identifies when I put the two things together. So I'll just do a prompt for that now. Okay, so now I'll put my final prompt in. So looking across both reports, are there any potential links between the way children, so those under 18, are behaving when it comes to their media consumption habits and their levels of activity? And does this differ depending on age, levels of affluence, race or gender? Because that is a key thing that came out of the Active Lives report, that was a bit of an issue. So we will see when we try and bring these together what we get. So it's come up with a conclusion based on those two reports, and it's suggesting that there's a parallel that children and young people are spending more time immersed in online media, and as they do that, their physical activity levels are stagnating, and there are deep-seated inequalities persisting across both areas. So that is basically saying that not all children are equal. So when we go through this now, basically it's saying that obviously those figures around less children meeting the guidelines for activity, broadcast media losing its grip, online video becoming the new king, and then the kind of key information from there. Children being aged between 4 to 15, the age group most likely to watch YouTube on a TV. And as you go further down, it talks about age being a big factor in this, as children between 7 and 9 have the lowest activity levels in terms of physical activity, and is the same, part of the same age group, where there are the steepest declines in people watching broadcast TV, and that as we get into gender, boys are more active than girls, and one of the big takeaways, as I mentioned at the beginning, as it mentioned at the top, children from less affluent families are consistently the least likely to be active. So that's something that's kind of feeding into it, alongside ethnicity as well. So you kind of seen, as it mentions here, there's like a general shift towards online media use amongst young people, running in parallel with a plateauing, so kind of failure to increase physical activity, and there being differences across different groups, effectively. So that would then give you the basis to go away and start thinking, right, I can investigate this story a bit more. Who can I speak to about it? Is this a consensus that kind of rings true? And that is how NotebookLM can kind of start you off in terms of developing this story. Okay, thank you. Goodbye.